Osteoarthritis is not just a fleeting pain, it is a brutal and progressive mechanical failure in your body's chassis. To combat this relentless agony of bone scraping on bone, modern medicine handed us NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen, diclofenac, and naproxen. The tragic problem that the pharmaceutical industry rarely highlights is that these synthetic drugs are double-edged swords. They often erode the protective lining of your stomach, overload your kidneys' filters, and paradoxically, studies show that chronic use can accelerate the degradation of the cartilage itself in the long run. You are, quite literally, destroying your digestive and cardiovascular systems just to temporarily mask your joint pain. But what if we didn't have to forcefully mask the pain? What if we could change the chemical environment inside the joint capsule to stop the destruction using medicinal herbs? 1. Turmeric, Curcuma longa. Our journey begins in the beating, humid heart of India. Turmeric is not just a bright yellow powder that gives color and flavor to curry. It has been the backbone of Ayurvedic medicine for over 4,000 years. When you take a fresh turmeric rhizome and cut it in half, your fingers are immediately stained with a fluorescent yellow-orange juice that exudes an aroma of damp earth, strong mustard, and pepper. This deep, vibrant color comes from a polyphenolic compound called curcumin. In the physiology of osteoarthritis, your body panics and begins to overproduce an inflammatory enzyme called COX-2. This is the microscopic villain that swells your joint, fills it with painful fluid, and causes that untouchable redness and heat. Billion-dollar pharmaceutical drugs were created specifically to inhibit COX-2, but many had to be pulled from the global market because they caused massive strokes and heart attacks. Curcumin, however, is a natural COX-2 inhibitor designed by biological evolution without the catastrophic cardiovascular side effects. But there is a frustrating surprise factor in turmeric's botany. Pure curcumin has terrible absorption. If you just swallow it raw or in a cheap capsule, your liver identifies it as a foreign body, destroys it, and expels it from your system in a matter of minutes. The true biological hack, instinctively discovered by ancient Asian cultures, was the use of heat and chemical friction. By mixing turmeric with black pepper, which contains an alkaloid called piperine, and a hot fat source, like coconut oil or clarified ghee butter, curcumin's bioavailability skyrockets by an astonishing 2,000%. With this combination, it safely crosses the intestinal barrier, enters the bloodstream, and travels straight into the synovial fluid of your knee, putting out the inflammatory fire from the inside out. 2. Boswellia, frankincense. If turmeric extinguishes one side of the osteoarthritis fire, boswellia is the compound that extinguishes the other. Traveling to the arid, rocky, and unforgiving landscapes of the Middle East and the Horn of Africa, we find the Boswellia serrata tree. This is a plant that survives where almost nothing else grows. When the thick bark of this desert tree is cut with a blade, it bleeds a thick, milky white sap. This sap heals the tree's wounds by hardening under the scorching sun, transforming into golden, translucent resin stones. Burning or crushing this resin releases a dense, smoky perfume with notes of pine and a touch of citrus. This is the famous sacred frankincense, transported on ancient trade routes and offered by kings in antiquity. But what ancient shamans and merchants knew purely by intuition, modern rheumatology is only now managing to map and prove under the microscope. While turmeric blocks the COX-2 enzyme, osteoarthritis has a parallel and secondary inflammation pathway, often completely immune to common painkillers. This second pathway is commanded by a destructive enzyme called 5-LOX. 5-LOX acts like a microscopic army that invades the joint and releases chemicals called leukotrienes, which literally devour living cartilage. The boswellic acids, abundantly present in this golden resin, are one of the very few natural 5-LOX inhibitors known to humanity. When you combine boswellia extracts with turmeric, you create an impenetrable double blockade. It is the military equivalent of cutting off the enemy army's two supply lines simultaneously. Patients using this combination report that their joints lose that characteristic morning swelling and the feeling of rust, allowing their range of motion to return without the mechanical stiffness. 3. Ginger, Zingiber officinale. Long before being confined to colorful jars in Western sushi restaurants, ginger was the central engine of heat and circulation in ancient Asian medicine. This knotty, twisted, and dense root, which resembles a cluster of small yellowish wooden fists, harbors formidable thermal power. Chewing a small piece of raw ginger triggers a sharp, burning bite that travels rapidly from the back of the throat down to the stomach. This heat is not a fleeting sensory illusion. It is the potent chemical signature of gingerols and shogalls. The vast majority of people think of ginger only as a comforting remedy for nausea, motion sickness, or colds, but it is, in reality, a master architect of joint reconstruction. The brutal and paralyzing pain of advanced osteoarthritis does not come solely from the mechanical contact of bone scraping on bone, but from prostaglandins, chemical pain messengers that scream uninterruptedly to your brain that there is critical damage in the joint. Ginger has the incredible biochemical ability to intercept and silence these messengers before they reach the central nervous system. In rigorous, double-blind clinical trials focused on elderly patients with severe and chronic knee osteoarthritis, concentrated ginger extracts proved to be statistically as effective as high daily doses of ibuprofen for pain relief. However, ginger brings a profound bonus benefit. Instead of acting like an acid that causes gastric ulcers, ginger's mucilaginous compounds actively heal, coat, and protect the stomach lining. It is the heavy-duty painkiller that your digestive system deeply thanks you for taking. 4. Devil's Claw, Harpagophytum procumbens. From the humid jungles and Asian plains, we parachute into the red, scorching sands of the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa. It is exactly in this inhospitable environment that we find one of the most terrifying and alien-looking plants on planet Earth, Devil's Claw. Its dried fruit looks like a fossilized wooden spider, covered in curved, hard, and sharp hooks, perfectly designed by evolution to latch painfully onto the hooves and heels of passing large animals, thereby ensuring the dispersion of its seeds. But the ancient healers of the San people, the Bushmen, couldn't care less about the scary surface fruit. They dig through the boiling sand in search of the secondary, thick, moisture-filled tubers growing deeply buried in the plant's roots. These roots, when sliced and prepared, exude an extreme, intense bitterness that is almost unpalatable to the untrained Western palate. However, it is exactly in the violent strength of this bitterness that the clinical magic resides. Devil's Claw tubers are massively loaded with a brutal compound called harpagicide. Advanced osteoarthritis features a terrifying biological phenomenon where the body, in its inflammatory desperation, releases enzymes called matrix metalloproteinases, MMPs. These enzymes begin to literally digest the structural proteins that give your cartilage its elasticity. The harpagicide in Devil's Claw acts as a brute force chemical shield. It travels through the bloodstream, penetrates the joint capsule, and physically blocks these enzymes, stopping them from devouring your remaining cartilage. Patients in Europe, where the herb is widely prescribed by doctors, frequently report such a dramatic reduction in chronic back, hip, and knee pain that they can drastically reduce or even completely abandon their prescriptions for dangerous opioids and heavy anti-inflammatories. 5. Rosehip, Rosa canina. Far from the lethal heat of the African desert, we travel to the freezing, damp, and dark winds of northern Europe and the Andean slopes of Chile. When the delicate petals of wild roses wither and fall in the autumn, what remains stuck on the thorny branch is a small, hard, bright blood-red sphere. This is the rosehip pseudofruit. During World War II, when England suffered heavy naval blockades and could not import vitamin C-rich citrus fruits for its population, the British government enlisted thousands of children to forage tons of these small red berries in the forests to produce survival syrups. The taste of fresh rosehip is sour, pungent, and highly citrusy, closely resembling wild cranberries. But what does this historical war syrup have to do with your arthritis-ground knees and hands? Absolutely everything. Hidden beneath the thin red skin, amidst the hairy and irritating seeds of the rosehip, exists a specific type of galactolipid called GOPO. Modern immunological science made a shocking discovery about GOPO. It acts as a master traffic controller for your white blood cells.
6. Cat's claw, Uncaria tomentosa.
Diving now into the dark, hot, and suffocatingly humid canopy of the Peruvian Amazon rainforest, we find a gigantic vine, as thick as a grown man's arm, relentlessly slithering and climbing up the trunks of centenarian trees toward the sunlight. What gives this plant its exotic name are the dozens of curved, incredibly hard, and sharp thorns, visually identical to the claws of jaguars or wild cats, rhythmically sprouting from its stem. Over centuries, the indigenous Ashaninka tribe developed the technique of scraping the inner bark, which is brown and intensely earthy, to make strong decoctions. When boiled in cauldrons for hours, it produces a dense tea that tastes rustically of chewed, damp tree bark. Cat's claw harbors a unique family of complex molecules called pentacyclic oxindole alkaloids. What impresses modern pharmacology and rheumatology is the surgical action of these alkaloids on a specific messenger protein in our body called tumor necrosis factor alpha, TNF-alpha. Think of TNF-alpha as the commanding general in your body. When its levels are high, it screams for all surrounding immune system cells to attack and destroy inflamed tissues. In severe osteoarthritis, and especially in rheumatoid arthritis, TNF-alpha inside the joint is completely out of control. Modern labs have created injectable biologic drugs that block TNF-alpha. However, they cost thousands of dollars per monthly dose and frequently shut down a large part of your entire immune system, leaving the patient highly vulnerable to fatal respiratory infections. The bark of cat's claw acts much more intelligently. It is a master modulator. It suppresses only the excessive and localized TNF-alpha inside the burning joints. It cools down the autoimmune aggression against the worn cartilage, restoring cellular peace but without disabling the natural immune defense shields that keep your body safe from common viruses and bacteria. 7. White willow bark, Salix alba. On the banks of cold, misty, fast-flowing rivers in Europe and North America grows an imposing tree with long, silvery leaves, whose thin and flexible branches droop toward the water as if they were eternally weeping. The white willow is, without any exaggeration, the undeniable grandfather of the entire modern painkiller industry. Over 2,000 years ago, Hippocrates, the revered father of medicine, advised women in labor and soldiers wounded in battle to strip green, flexible slices of bark from this tree and chew them vigorously. If you try doing that today, your mouth will contort in instant repulsion. The fresh bark is terribly bitter and highly astringent, drying all the saliva in your mouth in a second due to the excess tannins. However, this bitter bark is secretly packed with a compound called salicin. At the end of the 19th century, in 1899, chemists from the pharmaceutical giant Bayer isolated a synthetic version of this compound, altered its molecular structure, and patented it under the commercial name that the entire world has in their medicine cabinets today: aspirin, acetyl salicylic acid. But here lies the fatal flaw of industrialized modernity. Isolated synthetic aspirin is an extremely aggressive acid that comes into direct and immediate contact with the delicate lining of your stomach, frequently tearing the mucosa and causing daily, silent microhemorrhages. White willow bark, consumed in its ancestral form as teas or full-spectrum extracts, operates under completely different engineering. The salicin contained within it acts as an inactive prodrug. It passes through the stomach completely harmlessly and gently. It is only when it reaches the intestinal environment and enters the liver that our own bacterial flora and digestive enzymes convert it, slowly and sustainably, into the powerful analgesic acid. White willow delivers all the deep joint pain relief and safe blood thinning that aspirin promises, but with a sophisticated delayed release system that protects the gastrointestinal mucosa absolutely brilliantly and naturally.
8. Stinging nettle, Urtica dioica. To close our vast anti-osteoarthritis biological arsenal, we look at the vulgar weeds growing on the edges of dirt roads and in the damp castle ruins of Europe. The nettle is infamous among hikers and farmers for being entirely covered in tens of thousands of microscopic hypodermic needles made of pure silica. Accidentally brushing your leg against a green nettle leaf results in the immediate shattering of these glass needles, which inject pure histamine and formic acid directly under your skin, instantly creating raised white welts and a stabbing, burning sensation as if liquid fire had been poured onto your leg. Curiously, for many centuries, hardened Roman soldiers stationed in the cold north and medieval patients paralyzed by rheumatism used a disturbing and painful medicinal method called urtication. They literally whipped their own bare backs, shoulders, and knees with freshly picked nettle branches. The intense superficial inflammation provoked by the needles drew a massive and desperate flow of arterial blood to the nearly dead and cold joints underneath, washing away the stagnant osteoarthritis toxins and incredibly relieving the deep underlying pain within a few hours. Fortunately, the modern sophisticated phytotherapeutic use of nettle does not involve any pain. By drying the plant in the sun or boiling it vigorously in water, the fragile needles melt and instantly lose all their venom. What remains in the pot is one of the most profoundly mineral-rich and alkalizing botanical infusions in nature. When routinely ingested as a dark green broth or a concentrated extract, nettle acts primarily as a powerful metabolic waste solvent. It flushes the body and drastically reduces the levels of C-reactive protein, CRP, in the bloodstream, which is the body's main marker for chronic systemic inflammation. Furthermore, and crucially for osteoarthritis, nettle leaves are absurdly rich in biological boron and bioavailable flexible silica. When cartilage breaks down, the bone is exposed and begins to suffer microfractures upon impact. The boron and silica from the nettle are exactly the high-quality mineral mortar and bricks that your body desperately demands to attempt to rebuild, correctly calcify, and stiffen the exposed joint structure, helping to lock down and break the physical degeneration that accompanies the disease. The modern narrative pushed on us daily that osteoarthritis is merely an inevitable sentence of wear and tear, irreversible due to age, and that the only way out is the continuous use of stomach-corroding synthetic pills until the inevitable knee replacement surgery is fundamentally incomplete and outdated. From the incandescent resin of surviving desert trees that block destructive enzymatic genetic pathways, through the thermal bite of the healing ginger root, to the genius prebiotic time-release system of the willow bark, the plant kingdom possesses a level of molecular intelligence that human pharmacology still fiercely struggles to imitate in a lab. The pain of bone scraping on bone does not need to, and should not, be forcefully silenced with collateral damage using corrosive chemicals. It can be surgically dismantled, calmed, and nourished with the relentless, intelligent, and frequently forgotten pharmacy that grows silently beneath our feet. True healing begins when we stop merely masking the symptom and start altering the chemistry of the problem.